The first body was found in the heart of London's Wizarding Quarter, sprawled on an antique chaise lounge as though she had simply dozed off. The ministry officials who arrived first noted the lack of any visible wounds, no traces of dark spells, no struggle. Yet the victim, Amara Selwyn, had died with her eyes wide open, mouth slightly parted, and every mirror in her townhouse shattered from the inside out. The prophet ran with the most sensational theories: cursed heirlooms, a revenge spirit, a spell gone horribly wrong. But Hermione Granger had seen enough to know when something wasn't right. A peaceful death was never truly peaceful in the magical world. And so, when the second victim appeared only 3 nights later, her suspicions turned into a full-blown investigation. Liam Mulciber, an aura in training, had been discovered slumped over his desk, parchment crumpled beneath his stiff fingers. No injuries. No trace of poison. Just gone. And just like Amara, his reflection was missing. It was an absurd thing to say aloud, but there was no denying it. Where there should have been a mirrored image, a simple, logical, natural thing, there was only emptiness. A smooth pane of glass that reflected nothing. It took 2 more deaths before the ministry truly started to panic. Hermione was standing in a dimly lit study, deep in the archives of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, when Harry found her. He had come straight from Mulciber's funeral, still in his formal robes, the shadow of unease lingering behind his green eyes. "You found something?" His voice was quiet, careful. "I think so," Hermione murmured, her fingers trailing over the brittle edges of an old, half-forgotten text. She tapped the parchment, where a faded illustration showed something chillingly familiar. A wizard standing before a blank mirror, his own reflection absent. Below it, scrawled in jagged ink, were the words, "He who stares too long shall lose himself." Harry exhaled sharply. "That's subtle." She shot him a look, but her expression was grim. "It's called the Twin Curse, an ancient spell, long thought impossible. The idea is that under the right conditions, a person's reflection can become real. The perfect version of them steps out. And the original? Gone." The silence between them stretched. "You mean to tell me," Harry said finally, "someone's running around London stealing people's reflections and replacing them with, what, improved versions?" "I think it's more than that," Hermione admitted, flipping another page. The next passage made her stomach churn. It says that the reflection isn't just better. It's free of doubt, hesitation, weakness. The things that made the original person human. And it doesn't stop there. Harry leaned in. "What do you mean?" "Once it's out, it doesn't want to go back." The cursed mirror had first appeared in Nocturne Alley, sold under the guise of an enchanted beauty glass. It promised to show witches and wizards their best self, a version of them unburdened by flaws, stronger, sharper, everything they had ever wanted to be. At first, the effects were subtle. A person would gaze into the mirror and feel an odd sense of disconnect, like the reflection wasn't quite mirroring them anymore. Then came the whispers, soft at first, barely there, until the reflection began speaking back. By the time the victim realised what was happening, it was already too late. They would go to sleep that night and never wake up. Their better self had already stepped out of the glass, replacing them. The real them, trapped inside the mirror. Hermione traced every mirror sold in the last 6 months and found something even more unsettling. Not everyone who used it had disappeared. Some were still out there, living, walking, acting as if nothing had changed. But they had. Their friends noticed it first. A too perfect voice. Movements just a little too smooth. A smile that never quite faltered. The replaced were indistinguishable from the originals, except for one thing. They never looked into mirrors again. It was Draco Malfoy who confirmed Hermione's worst fears. They met in a quiet cafe near the ministry, the air thick with unease. He had summoned her, not with his usual drawl of superiority, but with something she had never heard in his voice before. "Fear. I need you to tell me if something is wrong with me," he said, fingers clenched around the handle of his untouched tea. Hermione frowned. "What are you talking about?" Draco exhaled sharply, looking around as if someone might be watching. "Something happened," he admitted. "I bought one of those damned mirrors, looked into it. It was just a joke, I thought, but then—" He stopped, shaking his head. "The night after, I had the strangest dream. I was standing in my bedroom looking down at myself, as if I were watching myself sleep." Hermione's stomach twisted. "When I woke up," Draco continued, his voice hoarse, "I felt different, stronger, clearer. like everything I had ever doubted about myself had been wiped away. But... He hesitated, his breath coming shallow. "But what?" Hermione pressed. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at her. "I haven't looked into a mirror since. I can't." The tea in Hermione's stomach turned to lead. "Draco," she said carefully, "do you remember waking up that night?" His silence was all the answer she needed. It wasn't Draco Malfoy sitting across from her. Not anymore. Later that night, Hermione sat in her flat, every reflective surface covered. She wasn't taking any chances. The file on Draco Malfoy lay open on the table, but her mind was racing far beyond his case now. Because if he had been replaced, who else had? Harry had been acting strangely lately too. A little too patient, too calm. His temper, once easily flared, had dulled. Had she seen him check his reflection recently? Her skin crawled at the thought, and then from the corner of the room she heard it. A whisper. Soft, indistinct, but coming from behind her. She turned slowly. The only thing there was her bedroom mirror, covered by a heavy cloth. The whisper came again. Not from behind the cloth. From inside it. Hermione stared at the covered mirror, heart pounding against her ribs. The whisper had been faint, like breath on cold glass, but unmistakable. It hadn't come from the room. It had come from inside. She reached for her wand with fingers that trembled only slightly. Lumos. A faint glow illuminated the mirror's edges beneath the cloth. The fabric didn't move, no rippling shadows, no shifting figures. It was silent now. Had she imagined it? She took a slow step forward. Another. The whisper hadn't called her name, hadn't spoken at all, but it had beckoned. Not in words, but in something deeper, something felt. A wrongness. She swallowed hard. Logic dictated she remove the cloth, inspect the glass beneath, confirm nothing was there. But instinct, honed through years of war and darkness, told her that whatever was inside that mirror was already watching her, waiting. Her breath left in a quiet exhale. No, not tonight. With a flick of her wand, she reinforced the covering, weaving protective spells into the fabric. Whatever lay behind it, whatever whispering thing pressed against the glass, it would have to wait. She had bigger concerns. Hermione turned away and returned to her desk, where Malfoy's file lay open. His last official record before this mirror business was a routine trade agreement for imported potions ingredients. Nothing suspicious, no ties to dark magic. If Malfoy had been replaced, he wasn't showing signs of malice, just difference. Stronger, sharper, more perfect. She traced her finger absently over the edge of the parchment. How many others were out there walking through London's magical world with stolen lives? Who else had been replaced? The next morning, Hermione went to Grimmauld Place. It wasn't just about Harry anymore. The mirror murders were spreading. Whispers of sleeping deaths were turning into panic, and the Ministry was pressuring her to name a suspect. She needed to be sure. Grimmauld Place had always been an unsettling place, but when Creature let her in, she felt it immediately. Something was wrong. It was too still. She moved cautiously through the house, past the familiar worn furniture, the smell of old parchment and burning wood from the flue. The walls were lined with framed magical photographs. Harry's parents, the old Order of the Phoenix, a few candid snapshots from after the war. And then at the end of the hall, a mirror. A tall antique thing, its gilded edges dull with age. She hadn't remembered it being there before. Her own reflection stared back at her. But not quite. Her breath hitched. The other Hermione stood just a little straighter, her eyes a shade sharper, the corner of her mouth quirked in something too poised to be a true smile. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. She stepped forward slowly, her fingers tightening around her wand. The reflection didn't move. Not immediately. Then, after a breath too long, it blinked. Hermione did not. She took a step back, wand raised. "Harry?" she called, voice steady. Footsteps on the staircase. A moment later, Harry appeared at the top of the landing. His hair was damp from a morning shower, sleeves rolled up, wand tucked casually into his belt. Completely normal. And yet, "You're early," he said, brows raising. Hermione's grip tightened. She turned her head just slightly toward him, just enough that her reflection should have mirrored the movement. It didn't. The thing in the glass was still looking directly at her. The world narrowed. "Harry," she said carefully, "have you looked in a mirror lately?" A pause. His expression didn't change. "Why?" The silence stretched. She didn't answer. Slowly, deliberately, she shifted her wand in her grip. Not a threat, just a readiness. Harry watched her. His face, his movements, all perfectly Harry. And yet, the version of him standing in the hallway had not once glanced at the mirror behind her. And he should have. Even now, with his sharp aura instincts, he wasn't checking his surroundings. He was avoiding it. Cold horror crept up her spine. Her mouth went dry. "How long," she asked quietly, "have you been like this?" His head tilted slightly. "Like what?" "Different." His smile was small. "Hermione, I think you're tired." No, she wasn't. She was wide awake. The thing in the mirror was still staring at her, unblinking. She stepped backward, careful, moving toward the front door. Harry didn't stop her. He didn't move at all. "You should get some rest," he said again, voice easy, too easy. And that was when Hermione ran. She didn't stop until she was in the heart of the Ministry, hidden in the Department of Mysteries. Her hands were shaking. Harry was gone. The real Harry. And he wasn't the only one. The reflections weren't just taking over bodies. They were taking over lives. The real question was, how many were left? Hermione didn't know how long she sat there, heart hammering, the realization settling over her like a slow-moving poison. Harry was gone. Not missing, not cursed, not hidden away in some Death Eater's basement. Gone. The person walking around in his body, the one standing in Grimmauld Place just an hour ago, wasn't him. And the worst part, no one else had noticed. She had left the Ministry that morning to a sea of familiar faces, people she had known for years, auras, officials, healers, Ministry clerks. But how many of them were real? How many were like Harry, walking, talking, laughing, while their real selves were screaming, trapped inside mirrors no one could see? She shuddered. There had to be a way to stop this. There had to be a way to bring them back. Her mind spun. The twin curse. The mirrors. The replacement process. The reflection couldn't escape on its own. That was the key. It needed something, a ritual, a trigger, a sacrifice. It needed the original person to sleep. That's when it struck. The victims, the ones found dead in their beds. They hadn't just been killed. They had been used. Their reflections had climbed out of them like molting skin, leaving behind the empty shell. The living ones, the ones still walking around, acting almost normal, they had survived the process, but something had gone wrong. They weren't fully gone. Hermione's pulse raced. If they weren't fully gone, that meant she could bring them back. The answer lay in the mirror at Grimmauld Place. That thing had looked at her, moved on its own. It was aware. If Harry's real self was anywhere, it was there. Trapped, screaming, waiting for someone to pull him out. She had to go back. Grimmauld Place was silent when she arrived. She moved carefully through the darkened halls, past the haunted portraits and the lingering scent of old magic. The mirror at the end of the corridor loomed in the dim light. The reflection stood there, watching. Still Harry's face, still his features, but not him. "Where is he?" Hermione whispered. The reflection tilted its head, considering her like one might an insect. Then it smiled, a slow, deliberate mockery of the expression she had seen 1,000 times. Hermione lifted her wand, her throat tight. "Bring him back!" The reflection didn't answer. Instead it raised its own wand. Her stomach lurched. It was fast, too fast, faster than Harry had ever been, wand flicking upward in a blur. A curse flew toward her. Hermione barely had time to throw herself to the side, the spell searing past her ear. The reflection stepped forward. Its movements were fluid, too perfect, too sharp, like a marionette imitating human grace. Hermione cast a stunning spell. It dodged. Too easily. It wasn't just mirroring her. It was better. Then it laughed. Low, soft, amused. Something inside Hermione snapped. She wasn't going to die here. She wasn't going to let this thing win. Her mind raced. The mirror. The twin curse. The reversal. She needed a way to break the cycle. The spell that created the twin curse required the original to be asleep, vulnerable, unaware. So what would happen if... Her breath caught. She had to force the reflection to look at itself. The duel was a blur. Spells firing, magic cracking through the air, glass shattering as she forced the fight toward the mirror. The reflection moved with impossible precision, dodging every attack, its face still twisted in that awful smile. It wasn't trying to kill her. It was playing with her, but Hermione wasn't playing. She feinted left, then pivoted hard, aiming a spell directly at the mirror. "Finite incantatum!" The reflection had half a second to react. Too late. The glass exploded inward, the surface warping and twisting, and then the screaming started. It wasn't coming from the reflection. It was coming from inside the mirror. The glass rippled like water, distorting, pulling at the air around them. Hermione staggered back, shielding her eyes as the magic howled, the room shaking around her. The reflection twitched violently. Its body convulsed, flickering, unravelling like torn fabric. The spell was reversing. Something was being pulled out of the glass. A shape. A figure. A person. Hermione's heart clenched. Harry. His real body collapsed onto the floor, gasping, eyes wild, skin pale and damp with sweat. The reflection, its stolen form breaking apart, let out one last shriek, its face twisting in fury. And then it was gone. The mirror shattered. Silence fell. Harry was breathing hard, his hands clutching at the floor as if trying to ground himself. Hermione dropped to her knees beside him. "Harry," she whispered, voice raw. His eyes met hers, his real eyes. "Hermione." His voice was hoarse, confused. He stopped, exhaling sharply, hands shaking. "I was trapped. I could see everything, but I couldn't move." His breath hitched. "It was using me. It was living my life." Hermione's throat tightened. "I know." He swallowed hard, then, "How many of us are there?" The words sent a chill down Hermione's spine. Us. Not just him. Others. Dozens. Hundreds. Maybe more. A slow horror crept over her. The reflections were still out there. Still walking, talking, replacing. The real versions were waiting. Trapped. And now they knew. Now the fight began.